Welcome to your next tech startup, the podcast exploring why startup hiring is tough and interviews suck. Host Isabel Rasmussen, a head of technical recruitment, draws on over a decade of experience along with expert guests to unpack what's broken and how to fix it. Let's dive in.
Hi, welcome to your next tech startup. I'm Isabel Rasmussen. Today I am speaking with the founder of SERV, Nickhil. And Nickhil and I used to actually work together. So I was his in-house recruiter. And before we worked together, he was at Amazon. Then we were at a late stage startup together. And now he has founded his own startup. And we're going to talk about kind of his hiring experiences throughout all that. So Nickhil, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Nickhil Bhave, founder at SERV, and what I was really excited to talk to you about today is just how I've transitioned from hiring really great talent at big companies like FANG companies to mid-stage startups to even the smallest seed stage company.
Get such a great experience at kind of hiring at FANG, then transitioning into kind of mid late stage startup hiring, and then seed stage hiring. At Amazon, you were building, how big was the team that you hired out in a certain amount of time?
Oh, I was a PM lead in Amazon Marketplace, building tools for the sellers and building AI programs, but that was only about 35-ish people by the time we built out the team. And then I had more of a blitz scaling team where I was in Alexa Mobile and we had a 2-star app. So Jeff Bezos gave us virtually unlimited resources to hire up and create a much better version of Alexa for every single homeowner.
So with that, unlimited resources is something I've always done. Startup recruiting has never been even close to a world I have been in. Tell me a little bit about how unlimited resources and hiring, like what are some of the dynamics that exist there that don't exist for you since that time?
Yeah, so if I were to step back, like you're always pitching for headcount when you have big ideas in a big company, right? I'm not gonna say like, hey, it's really easy to get unlimited resources. But relative to early stage startup, it's totally different. Like in terms of the amount of compensation, cash compensation you can offer senior level employees, it's just very different than the resources you have. It really does factor into how you hire. But I'm here to say that you still need to bring rigor and you still need to bring the same level of competence to your interviewing programs. Even if you have like a really lightweight process, you still need to dig in and find the best talent you can.
And the main difference you're saying is kind of you still need to run a very good hiring process, make great hires, obviously, because you're so dependent on each of those hires, but you can't be as competitive on, some of the benefits like salary and all of those pieces of it. So you have
Yeah,
to
I
kind of,
mean, in many ways, you have many more benefits. You get much more ownership that's available, like both in terms of the scope you can have on the product, but the impact you can have in customers and the equity. But for some folks, they just have certain bills they need to pay. You certainly need to understand the type of person and their life stage and who you're bringing into the company. And that just narrows your funnel of who you can be speaking with. I always say you really need great competence in a startup, but even more than that, like our top company values that you need to care a lot about our mission because it's just too challenging to work in the ambiguous environment. It's too difficult to be innovating on the frontier if you aren't deeply connected to the mission and vision of the company. That's what we really select for even more than anything else.
yeah, I always think of that. Like when you're making that hire for your first 10 engineers, like if they, if they're kind of like, yeah, 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 I'm talking to you, I'm talking to other companies. And it is hard because you're a startup. And so, like, they don't know as much about you. So, you do have the responsibility to educate them and help them get excited. But if they're not excited about the things that come with an early stage startup and about once you like sell them on what's happening and what you're doing, if they're not excited about that, it is really hard. Like actually when we were at Grove together, I have a MBA in sustainability, which I don't use, but being at a environmentally conscious company was something that was really important to me. And actually within recruiting, was something that I really struggled with. Was if I'm talking to candidates who could care less about the environment at that stage that we were in the company, do I move them forward in the hiring process? And I wasn't getting clear communication that, you know, people have to be really like aligned with what this company is about to join, which I'm sure was very different when they were making hiring decisions for the first 20 people in the company. You and I were there when it was probably like headquarters was more like 150 or so.
That's right. We were just scaling up, I think, from a team of like 20 engineering staff to over 100. So like that, I was brought in as kind of that, let's build a product organization when one really had not been established previously. So um, yeah, I think commitment to the company's mission is the most important. Any entrepreneur worth their salt can pitch their company, right? And you're gonna want to go into sales mode to get people excited, but you also have to give them that window to say no, and that really isn't their specific goal for their next career because when you come into a startup, you have to put the company's mission first ahead of what personal goals you may have, right? And that may mean technically there might be a stack that you really are excited about working on, but it's just overkill for the stage of validation that the company has. I've built hundreds of microservices in the past. SERV is a monolith. So I think
Mhm.
it's really important to have competency that you can apply to what's needed for that company. And so by selecting for
Yeah.
that really early
Let's
on in your recruiting process, that helps you find the right folks. But I mean, there's more to it than that, obviously. But
yeah, let's jump into that. So, the interview plan is something that when I was an in-house recruiter, I promoted a ton. And you wrote about it in the blog piece about how you have to put in the hours before you start interviewing. So I think a lot of times people like, okay, we need to hire a senior PM. Here's the job posting. Like people start applying, you start sourcing, you start interviewing, and then it's like, okay, and now what? And ideally, before you even have a candidate in pipeline, the now what is there. So and that's also how you're identifying which are the candidates that you talk to. So, to me, step one is you have to identify your must-haves. And you're typically, I always say 5 to 7 must-haves. And that's a combination of like I normally say technical skills because I'm hiring software engineers, but that's a combination of skills and values, or soft skills. How would you say it for a PM? You would say
competencies, usually. Yeah.
competencies.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and what are some of when you think about like competencies for a PM? What are you thinking about for like must-haves typically when you're like
Yeah.
startup hiring?
I would say product sense or the ability to really understand customers well is probably the number one assessment, right? And you can have specific criteria at different levels on there's a progression of the skills in that category. So there's even like branching off around how well can you communicate that to the organization. Um, I found those must-haves to be a major key to success at Amazon's hiring bar, right? Like when every time, and this is no secret, they publish many guides, like they use the leadership principles exceptionally well. And there are also functional competencies, and you assign people once you have that interview plan, what's important for the role. Now all of a sudden you can bring more interviewers into your process, right? You can delegate discovery and to go really deep in those competencies. And I've found that fact finding mission is just too much for one person to do. You're never going
Yeah,
to be able to get the full picture of the person. And the other thing it does is it helps you go from opinions and votes to
right.
collecting data. And I think the thing that you and I really pushed for at Grove, which was very successful, is um, your job is to evaluate the competencies and against those must-haves, right? And when I brought interviewers in, it was very difficult to go from the previous mode, which is, do I like this person and do I want them to be a part of the company? And say, no, like 30 minutes really isn't enough to get that full picture. I want you to tell me if this person has the chops to do what we really need or embodies the company values that we really also want to validate. So doing the hard work up front is like absolutely critical if you want to hire well.
Just add on with
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
so the interview, like I said, there's those 5 to 7 must-haves, which is the competencies, soft skills. Then you have a pre-brief meeting with your interviewers. You're going over those, and in that pre-brief meeting, we would decide, okay, this is competency number 1. There's 2 people that are responsible for that competency. And the second one, there's 2 people responsible for it. Every once in a while, there'd be something like communication skills, which everybody is naturally evaluating, but really breaking that down. And also in that pre-brief meeting, one of the things that's so critical is someone on your team might think that there's something missing, having that conversation there. Because if you're not having that conversation there in the debrief meeting, when they are making their decision on that candidate, they may have created must haves that the hiring manager hasn't agreed to.
Yeah,
And
correct.
then all of a sudden, you can't hire anybody because this person has their 7 must haves, this person has their other 7 must haves, this person has their 7 must haves, and nobody's finding out about all of those anyways because that's impossible to do in 45 minutes. You have 15 must haves, and that's just, then you're not hiring humans, you're hiring unicorns. Really getting clear on that in a pre-brief meeting, which I think a lot of organizations, I don't think they do that. And then you take that to your debrief meeting. And one of the things you had called out, which I really loved in the blog piece, was just like how to, it's not just about the pre-brief meeting, it's also making sure your interviewers know how to interview.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part about startups is that your first hires are the most important, but you have no help to make those first hires, right? When I was at Amazon, I could go find people that had done 100 interviews. I had a bar raiser who had trained and maybe done 300, 400 interviews. That person was really calibrated well on how to do great loops. And when you're in a startup, it's all on you as a founder.
Well, that's such a great point. One of the things when we were talking about interview plan and pre-briefs, just in regards to debriefs, one thing that I want to make sure that, you noted it in the blog and just like in the process, like the way to get away from, oh, I like this person. Oh, I think I would enjoy working with them. You call out in the blog, everybody fills out their feedback before the debrief meeting. That feedback is sent out to the group. So the scores and where people like stand, if they think it should be a hire or a no hire, is shared prior to any group think. And then also during the debrief is bringing them back to the competencies. These are the must haves that you were responsible for evaluating. On this must have, are you a yes or a no? On this must have, are you a yes or a no, and why? And really focusing on that instead of allowing them to kind of go anywhere and everywhere they want. And this is why I'm a no. Like the no should tie to the must haves, or the yes should tie to the must haves.
Yeah, and I think everybody around the table knowing what that person's superpowers are is really powerful when they onboard later too, right? It's also really
Yeah,
helpful for the hiring manager to understand what were the gaps or risks, and are you gonna take ownership of that risk and actually say, I can teach this person to cover that, or somebody
right,
in my team that's really excellent at it, maybe I can pair them as a mentor and fill that gap, even
right.
though as a founder, I have no time to coach. And so, like, those
No.
are really valuable data, even if you already know. Like, let's say you're the founder and you read all the data back and you own the decision and you just want to move quickly. It really does help that person be successful to have that conversation and go through it. You see that as employees see that you really value hiring, it also makes that really clear about what is important in the talent process overall, and that you are paying attention to who's coming in the door. And opening up that
Yeah.
process actually will make them better leaders in the future, and they'll be able to model your example as well. So I really find the
Yeah.
debrief process, even if you feel like you don't have time all the time, you can group them together and really focus on certain candidates. If you're finding like, hey, this person had really poor scores, like you don't have to spend all the time to go through why, right? Spend the
Right.
time on the candidates that have a realistic shot at getting an offer. Um,
Yeah.
it is really funny because as a founder, you always feel like you never have enough time for anything. If you can't
Mhm.
define what this person is going to do for you and how you're going to see their success in the first 100 days or so of them being with you, don't hire it, right? Like if you don't understand the function well enough to even evaluate it clearly, like you probably are not going to be a good boss to that person and they're probably not going to do really well when they start. But if you're deciding to do a job posting, a rec, and really interview a full-time person, I do recommend doing something to identify what are the must-haves and making sure you get unbiased data back to make that decision. So any process you want, whether it's the one I put in the blog that we worked on together or something even lighter weight, like those are the fundamental parts of it.
I agree. It is hard at different stages, and I think, like, really that mid to late stage startup and the process that we ran was able to be very successful because you had enough people on the team. You were able to dedicate the time there, but, like you brought up as a founder, there are a lot of things that make it hard, and I appreciate your authenticity about it because there's a lot of people that are founding startups in the AI space right now, and they haven't had as much hiring experience and there's a big learning curve there. So thank you so much for connecting. I hope you make some great hires this year.
Thank you so much. We're always looking for great technical talent as well as non-technical talent. So if you're really passionate about making it easy to buy home services, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear your experiences. But also if you're just another founder who needs some help interviewing PMs, like I'm happy to help as well.
I'll include your LinkedIn and company site in the description below.
Great.
All
Well,
right,
thank you
thank
so much.
you.
Yeah, wonderful.